And the response I got was basically, I suppose, if you want to try out your ideas, then please go ahead. We'll support you in that. And if they turn out to be brilliant ideas and work really well, Reform Party will put them into the manifesto at the next general election. But if they turn out to be a complete disaster, they were all your idea and we've never heard of you. But over the past 30 odd years, the police have not stood up very well, in my opinion, to the hammering that they've been taken from a lot of left-wing activists. And the fact they were leading such completely different lives, and this is where you get, the wokeism coming from, is that people who live in, I don't know, Islington or Highgate or somewhere like that only go to nice dinner parties with nice people who work for the BBC and hold similar views, are leading a completely different life to somebody who lives on a council estate in Leicester because they had taken a decision around a Muslim protest. This was when they were all the protests against Palestine and Israel and so on. And one of the factors that had been taken into account was the concern that if the event was banned, the organisers might go ahead anyway. Then the police would be in a position of having to move in to break it up, because it would then be an illegal gathering. And that the people likely to attend that sort of event were the sort of people who were likely to turn violent. Right?
Hello, and a warm welcome to the Reform Party podcast. Today I'm joined by my co-host Nick Goulding, and we have in the studio a very special guest, Mr. Rupert Matthews. Now, Rupert, if you don't know him, is the Chief Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicestershire. Welcome, Rupert.
And Rutland. Leicestershire and Rutland. Must never forget, but I've got both flags here. Look, the red and white is Leicestershire, the green and yellow is Rutland. I
apologise for my mistake.
Rupert, perhaps we could open, if you just gave, for the listeners who may not be aware of your illustrious past in the European Parliament and so on, a little sort of resume of your background.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm really a historian. I suppose that's the first thing to say. And the vast majority of my working life, I've earned a living as a historian. So I've written books. If you go onto Amazon, type my name in, it'll bring up a list of what's in print at the moment. I've done consultancy for movies, television shows, making sure that people are wearing the appropriate costume for the period it's set in, and they've got the right sort of table around the table and that sort of stuff. But I've always been interested in politics as a hobby, as was my mother before me. My grandmother before her, she was a suffragist back in the day, which is great. And so some years ago, when I was still living down in London, I was on the council there, the London Borough of Kingston. I was on that council for a number of years. I stood for Parliament, obviously didn't get in. Then I stood for the European Parliament, didn't get in there either. But as you may know, in the European Parliament, if a member dies or retires or leaves or whatever, they don't do by-elections because they've got proportional representation. They just bump the next person up. And I was the next person. So I got bumped up. I did, I think, 3 years in Brussels, was it? I think it was 3 years. And then, of course, we left. So I stopped being an MEP and went back to doing history for, I think, about 18 months, 2 years or so, and then got elected to be the Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicestershire and Rutland. So that's a very brief gallop through my career.
Fantastic. I mean, I don't know if you may recall, but with the electoral system for the European Parliament, when we moved from constituency-based members of the European Parliament to the proportional system, it was said at the time that Gordon Brown had pushed the system through as the worst possible form of PR in order to discredit it so that it wouldn't be brought in here, in the same way he managed to kibosh the Prime Minister on bringing us into the Euro. So, and now the Welsh have brought much the same system in Wales, which...
That's right, yes. The dear old De Hont system, which as proportional representation, I mean, there are lots of different types of proportional representation, as I'm sure you and your listeners know. So, there are different ways. The D'Hondt system manages to actually favour the larger parties over the smaller parties, which I suspect is its usual attraction to governing parties, because they tend to be the big parties and, of course, want a system that favours them. But, yeah, it's terrible.
Can I just say, Rupert, that in fact, Nick has been banned sine die for talking about any kind of proportional representation? Wendy's banned him.
It is a very complicated subject, and even as someone who's been involved in politics and has gone through the proportional representation twice now, I think, because it was single transferable vote for PCCs first time I stood, I can't say I fully understand it. And the arguments for and against, everyone always says it's fair. Well, it's fair if you think the determining factor should be party political control. It's not fair if you think the determining factor should be who the candidate is. But I suppose that's an argument for another time, isn't it?
Well, I'm with you on that, but as I've been told by Ken, I can't go further down the rabbit hole of PR, even though it may benefit us in Wales. But turning to your journey from being a Conservative candidate and elected official, tell us a bit about the journey that brought you into the Reform Party as a sitting police and crime commissioner.
Oh, okay. So I think it's fair to say that I've always been a non-conformist member of the Conservative Party, if I can sort of put it like that. So the journey really began. I became a police and crime commissioner. I stood originally because I thought that the police were going down the wrong track. I thought that they were becoming increasingly estranged from the British public. Of course, this manifests itself in various ways of two-tier policing that you hear about, the way they're very enthusiastically go and arrest people for what they've put on social media, and so on. But that, to my mind, has been driven by a conscious decision that the police made probably about 40 years ago, in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, that sort of period, where they abandoned the preventative community-based policing model, which is what, of course, Sir Robert Peel had brought in the 1820s, 1830s. And instead, they'd adopted a more reactive investigatory style of policing, which, from the point of view of the police, of course, is much more exciting to drive around in cars with blue lights flashing and arrest villains than it is to walk around a town centre chatting to old ladies doing their shopping. I can understand it's more exciting for the people doing it, but the unfortunate effect of that has been that the police, instead of talking to the public a lot of the time, end up driving around in their cars and not engaging with the public very much, unless there's a real emergency and something's gone wrong, which of course isn't always the best sort of scenario for that. It also means that, as Nigel has pointed out, our streets have become increasingly lawless because there isn't a deterrent factor there. If somebody is considering perhaps a bit of shoplifting or pickpocketing or stealing a handbag, if they think a police officer might come around the corner at any minute on his beat, it's a real deterrent to doing so. But the police don't do that anymore. And so that deterrent has gone. And I think over the 30 odd years since that was withdrawn, criminals have become bolder and bolder. And indeed, even habitual people who are not habitual criminals might think it's worth taking the risk. So I stood for PCC because I thought the police had gone down the wrong route. Once I got here, I found two things. First of all, the powers of a police and crime commissioner are very limited, and there's not much he can do about trying to get the police to change how they do policing. And secondly, that the Conservative Party hierarchy didn't really think there was a problem and thought the system was generally working okay. It just needs perhaps a little bit of tweaking, a bit more money and so on. So when I got into my second term and I was re-elected last year, I started to come up with some more bold ideas about what a police and crime commissioner could do given the limited range of powers at their disposal, and what a bold and radical government could do to try and address issues from the top end, from the Home Secretary's end. And basically, the Conservative Party wasn't interested. They didn't want to know. And I thought, well, okay, fair enough. You know, who am I? I'm not an expert in this. I'm just somebody who's trying to get the job done. So after some months of bashing my head against a brick wall, I said, all right. I said, well, you don't like my ideas. That's fine. They might be rubbish ideas. What are your ideas? I said, because, you know, I was a Conservative PCC. I'm sitting here. I said, look, if you've got any ideas you want to try out, even if they're really weird and wacky, tell me and I'll give it a go. And the reply I got was, oh, well, no, we haven't really got any. We're still thinking about our policy platform. No, And I thought, well, this is a great big going nowhere. So my initial plan was that I'd go back to being a historian. I'd jack in the politics and think I've given it a good shot, not got anywhere with it, jack it in, go back to being a historian. But I was moaning about this at a drinks reception back in, I suppose it was about March, April time, something like that. And unbeknownst to me, one of the chaps I was moaning to at great length on the subject is well plugged in with Reform. So the next thing I know is I get a phone call saying, we hear you're fed up with the Conservative Party, why don't you come and join Reform? So I went along and I explained sort of in rather more detail, but what I've just explained to you about where I was and I was fed up with it and so on. And the response I got was basically, I suppose, if you want to try out your ideas, then please go ahead. We'll support you in that. And if they turn out to be brilliant ideas and work really well, Reform Party will put them into the manifesto at the next general election. But if they turn out to be a complete disaster, they were all your idea and we've never heard of you. So I thought, I'll take that. That's okay. And so here I am in Reform, and I'm now progressing ways to try out my ideas here in Leicestershire. And then, of course, the government suddenly announces they're going to abolish BCCs. So I'm not quite sure where that leaves me. But anyway, I'm glad I've changed. I've had a really warm welcome from the Reform Party, both nationally and here in Leicestershire and Rutland. So I don't regret it. I think it's great. And it gives me a lot more freedom of action, which is what I wanted.
Yes. As far as it being abolished is concerned, it will be a sort of two-way thing. Whereas in some places where they've got these executive mayors, the powers, as I understand it, from the original announcement, will devolve to the new mayor. So where I'm sat in Cheshire, the mayor elected in 27, as is currently scheduled, will take on the responsibilities of police and crime commissioner when the current one retires in 28. And in those places, and I don't know, does this apply to Leicestershire and Rutland?
We don't know yet. The government's meant to be making an announcement in March next year, but so we don't know yet.
So either it will devolve to the new mayor that you do get, or they will go back to the usual committee that is probably worse than useless.
Yeah, that's right. So you're quite right. If you get a strategic mayor, the powers go to the strategic mayor, or at least most of them do. There are some things around victim support and so on where it's not entirely clear, but we're assuming that they will. You're right. If there isn't a strategic mayor, then the announcement said that there would be a committee made up of the leaders of each of the top tier authorities. So on the one level, a leader of a county council, for instance, or leader of a city council, has got lots to do. And if they're expected to turn up to a committee 6 or 7 times a year, they're not going to be able to give it the focus that I'd suggest that the job demands. And the other thing is that in some parts of the country, in Lincolnshire, is just over the border from me in Leicestershire, there is only one top tier authority, which in Lincolnshire is the county council. And so you abolish the PCC and give the job to just a committee made up of one person, which seems odd. So I think they're probably going to have to give that a little bit more thought as to how that system will work. It just seems to have been written on the back of an envelope, to be honest. I can't quite work out where that's come from. I think they must have been in a rush to announce something and just scribbled something down and hope for the best. Maybe they'll give it more thought.
Can I ask you, Rupert, you said that the powers of the PCC are very limited. Would it be easier for me to ask you what powers you do have than the powers that you don't have? So what can you do?
Okay, so there's two parts of it. There's the police and then there's everything else. So in the everything else, which is victim support, crime prevention, witness support, that sort of thing, basically, I can do anything I like within the budget available. And so I can and do support crime prevention measures being done by parish councils. I commission companies directly to do crime prevention measures. So just as a for instance, if somebody is burgled, they get a visit from a crime prevention specialist, home security, who goes around and checks the lock on the back door, the locks on the windows and all that sort of stuff. And they get a free upgrade. And so I'll commission a company to do that. When it comes to the police, not much is the answer. So once every 4 years, I get to write a strategic document called the Police and Crime Plan. But that is a very high level strategy. So that will say things like, we think burglary is a bad idea, or road safety would be great if we could achieve it, and things like that. And then the chief constable, according to the legislation, has to have due regard to the police and crime plan. So he can ignore it completely if he wants to. He just has to come up with a reason. If it's queried, he has to write to the Home Secretary and explain why. But he's free to do anything he likes. So it was sort of framed that way originally because there was a real concern that an elected politician might try to interfere with police decisions. Okay, might step in and say, no, I think Fred Bloggs is guilty. You ought to go and arrest him, which would be ridiculous. But at the same time, it's been drawn so much to stop an elected politician interfering that the democratic oversight means almost nothing. If the chief constable, let's say, were to decide that the theft of jelly babies was a more serious crime than murder, and he put more resources into investigating jelly babies than murder, he can, and there'd be nothing anyone can do to stop him. So I think that what ideally we would need is for that border between the peace or the elected politician, in future being an elected mayor presumably, and the chief constable needs to be shifted a little bit the other way, so that the elected person responsible to the public does have some sort of influence over the strategies that the police use and what their priorities are. Because at the minute, there's no real democratic control at all.
Sorry, could I ask you about the purse strings? Because with your historian's hat on, if you take the English Civil War, it was the purse strings that sort of drove it, and parliamentary desire to manage what the monarch did through control of the expenditure that they allowed him. Now, you are the budget holder, but I don't know how much authority you have within that. Could you, for example, if you didn't think the chief constable was doing the right things, remove money from the police budget and put it into crime prevention, for example?
Yes and no is the answer to that. So we're currently going through the budget setting process. And under the budget setting process, I can allocate £20 million to crime prevention. I can allocate £5 million to victim support and so on. But once I've allocated £250 million to the chief constable, he can spend it how he likes. So what I can't do is say, here's £250 million, chief constable. Of that, you must spend £20 million on crime prevention, you must spend £10 million on police cars. I can't do that. All I can do is allocate him a total budget, and then during the course of the year, monitor how he spends it and ask him questions on why he's done that. So were he, for instance, to suddenly treble the amount of money he spends on police cars, I could write him a formal letter and say, why on earth have you bought a Lamborghini to patrol the M1? It's not very good value for money. But I can't make him do anything.
Could you, though? You just said that you might give him 10 million that you want him to spend on crime prevention. Is there any reason why you couldn't up the crime prevention budget from 20 million to 30 million and reduce his budget by 10 million, but be prepared to allocate funds from crime prevention back to him if he's doing the things that you want him to do? Is there anything stopping you doing that?
Oh, let's think, because the problem with this is once the money has been allocated in the annual budget, that's pretty much where it has to stay.
But if you were asking him to do issues related, I mean, I'm just taking from what you said just now. You said you could give him a budget that included 10 million that you're expecting him to spend on crime prevention. But if you didn't give that to him, if you kept it yourself for your crime prevention budget, given that the purpose of the money is crime prevention, you could then, I'm hypothesizing, allocate that 10 million in bite-sized chunks when he's doing the things in that regard you wanted him to do. Is there a reason why you couldn't do that?
I would have to go and look at the legislation on that one. My understanding is that he gets a lump sum and then that's it. It's an interesting concept, though, isn't it? Because like I said earlier, I commission companies and charities and whatnot to provide various services. So let's say victim support. If somebody comes in and they're report that they're a victim of domestic abuse, it may be necessary to move them out of the house and get them into a safe environment. Now, at the moment, I commission a charity to do that. Could I commission the Chief Constable to provide a service? Interesting question. I will go and look.
While you're looking at that, just another idea to throw into your pot. I don't know about Leicestershire and Rutland, but in many parts of the country, parish councils, who you mentioned earlier in the context of crime prevention, have a collaboration agreement with chief constables to produce a police community support officer. Now, if you were to take funds, and at the moment, the chief constable has his dibs on those PCSOs. They don't necessarily follow the priorities of the parish council, which is a sore point. And in fact, it's one of the things that deters parish councils from engaging in that activity because they know that it's going to be taken from them. If, and I'm hypothesizing here, if you were to have reserved the funds that might be spent on those PCSOs, and instead of that money going to the chief constable, if you push that straight to the parish councils, you're still getting the same PCSO, but the control as to what that PCSO does, the piper paying the tune, would have been somewhat shifted. So your priorities in terms of crime prevention, you would have more hold on.
Okay. Don't know about PCSO. I did look into doing this with, or a similar thing with police constables. There's a scheme running in Holland whereby a town council, so they don't go down to the parish level, so the equivalent here, I suppose, would be district councils, can pay to the police force in order to get 1, 2, 3, however many police constables exclusively assigned to their area. And then those police constables, then they're still employed by the police, but effectively their day-to-day management falls with the district council in terms of, we want you to go out and do some speed traps today, or please go and deal with e-scooters today or whatever. So day-to-day management sits with the district council. In this country, that would be illegal. So I did look into this, but I'm not allowed to do that. I hadn't thought about PCSOs, to be honest. I was sort of trying to mimic this Dutch program and ran into a brick wall with that and realised that it wouldn't be proper in this country. Or I suppose, if the answer is no with PCSOs, then I suppose I could pay for a security guard for a number of hours a week for a parish council. I suppose I could do it that way, maybe. Wouldn't be ideal, but it would be something, wouldn't it?
I mean, in terms of full disclosure, a scheme along those lines is one of the things that I was proposing when I stood for the Reform Party to be Police and Crime Commissioner for Cheshire back in 2020. And I received the kingly sum of about 4% of the vote, Reform being where it was at the time.
I was going to say, 2020, that wasn't bad.
No, it wasn't bad. I was quite pleased with it. But you've got to sort of walk along the path to get to where we want to be now. But nevertheless, yes. I did find that proposal, insofar as I was actually able to engage with people, which was my main difficulty, did elicit a lot of support from the grassroots, because people feel so disengaged from the police priorities that if they had a way, and I'm talking about the people who are actively engaged in the local communities, the sort of people who are on parish councils and local community action groups and so on. And my own view is that for that sort of slice of expenditure, people would see better return for their taxpayers' money in terms of measures to reduce crime in their areas if such a scheme were to become viable. Comment.
Yeah, I mean, also going off the slight tangent, it would also help with the whole trust and confidence in the police bit, because if there was a constable or a PCSO who was transparently doing what the local community wanted, as expressed through the parish council or the district council, that must surely help with the trust and confidence thing, which of course has taken a real battering recently.
I would. Can I just say, Rupert, from what you've said thus far, it seems to me that you're making a very good case for your abolition, because if you're not able to have, and as you've said, any influence at all on policing on the ground, in terms of, for example, looking at the issue of the logging of non-crime hate incidents, or looking at the diversity, equality and inclusion roles that the police have, if you're not able to even have any influence at that kind of level, I really don't see the point.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was going to just chip in on the other side of that argument is that just like the reform councils that have been elected in the 10 or 11 authorities at the moment, their hands are very significantly tied. So you might say, what's the point in getting reform elected to those councils? The point is, it's preparing the ground and setting the framework from which we can achieve change in the future, and exploring the ideas. And because a lot of these constraints, just to give the other side of the argument, are from what central government is doing and the framework of rules within which the PCC sits. So in answering Ken's question, can you just sort of, we're obviously at two extremes there, but that's allowing you to come through the middle.
Okay, so I mean, those of us on the inside of this system have recognised for some time that the role of the PCC is very constrained, and there have been various suggestions on how to try and get around that. I mean, on the one hand, wanted to give PCCs more powers, on the other hand, forcing the police to publish more data. So they're not really very good at publishing data in public, whether it's about crime figures or what have you. They don't like doing it. And so if you force them to publish more data, it wouldn't mean that there was a bit more in the way of direct accountability, either to individual citizens or to councils or to the press. So there have been different ideas kicked around about how to deal with this lack of direct power over what the police do. But you're absolutely right. A lot of this is constrained by central government. And of course, one of my favourite bugbears is the Equality Act, which is behind a lot of the wokeness that you see coming through the police. They are told that they must take into account people's ethnicity. They're told they must take into account people's gender identity and so on. That's all coming from central government. And there is nothing either I or the Chief Constable could do to change that. It's from central government. On the second point that you raise, we live in a democracy and we all want to get reform into the seats of power. So Britain is, in European terms, quite a centralised state. A lot of the power does sit in Whitehall and Westminster. And so to effect really radical change in this country, you have to take over the House of Commons, you have to take over Whitehall and get your hands on the levers of power there. And what I'm hoping to do, and I know what Councillor Harrison at Leicestershire County Council is doing, is to demonstrate that Reform is a credible political party, that when we're elected, we can change things, we can have an impact, we can do what the public want us to do, albeit within the envelope of powers given to us from central government. And if over the next, 3 years, isn't it, to the next general election, over the next 3 years, those of us who are in elected positions in local government, if we demonstrate Reform is doing a good job and is doing a credible job and is having a significant impact, that will then encourage people to go and vote Reform at a general election, because people tend to vote for change if they believe change can be achieved. As with the Brexit referendum, we had loads of people voting that just don't vote as a rule. And some of the wards where you would normally expect to turn out, even at a general election, to maybe about 50%, it was up at 75, 80% in the referendum because people believed that the result of that would be honoured. And I think if people believe that a Reform government coming into office at Westminster really will deliver the changes that people want to see, then they will go and vote for it. And that means Reform will get in. And it's up to me, it's up to Reform councillors to demonstrate we can make a difference, that we will change things. And then we'll propel Nigel into number 10. And once we've got our hands on the levers of power at Whitehall and Westminster, then we can really start to change things for the better.
Have you had any dialogue with Reform headquarters on the sort of policy areas that, particularly now that it's being given to those executives, there's a number of executive mayor elections coming up in 26 and more in 27. Now, those people may or may not have police powers at the moment, but they will be getting them in 28.
Yes.
Has there been any dialogue as to, from a policing point of view, what they might put in their manifesto? Because I do think the contention in the country at the moment, if we could have a strong policing element to our candidates' campaigns, it would be helpful.
Yeah. So 2 weeks ago, I met with all the candidates that have been selected so far. I think there's one to go for next year, and then obviously the ones for 27 haven't been selected yet. So I had a meeting with them. I gave to all of them the manifesto I stood on last year, which certainly in Conservative Party terms was very radical. I think probably in Reform terms it was probably quite mild and restrained, but even so. So I shared my manifesto from last year with them all. I explained to them the intricacies of how the system works, to give them an idea of sort of what they're getting into. And I've got a meeting with Paul Nuttall I think it's next week or the week after, again, to sort of try and push that process forwards and make sure that all of our candidates who are standing for mayoral positions next year are fully aware of what sort of powers they're going to be getting in terms of law and order, and how best to use them and how to use it. So this is my 4th year, and I don't think I really got a hang on it till about a year or 18 months ago, because of course nobody wants to tell you how you can be more powerful because it would mean they're less powerful. So yes, the process is in place. It is happening. I'm hoping that by the time we get to each of the candidates writing their manifestos, I suppose I wrote mine in February, so I suppose they'll be doing it at a similar time of year. All of them will have a really firm grasp of what they can achieve and what they can do and how to phrase it and how to get it. Because sometimes this is as much about getting the phraseology right, that what you put in front of the public, you want a good eye-catching slogan. It's got to be expressed in terms that the public can easily understand. If you start using police jargon and so on, you're not going to get anywhere. It's got to be hard-hitting, and it's got to be phrased in a way that the general public, who aren't specialists, can understand what you're getting at. So yes, I've met all the candidates. I'm going to be meeting them again after Christmas. I'm in touch with the party leadership on this. So yes, the party's got a system for doing it. Yeah.
Good. We hear a lot, Rupert, about two-tier policing. What's your impression of how politically motivated policing is? So you get one march, which is allowed people to cover faces, etc.
Yeah, it is sort of like the civil service and the state bureaucracy generally, in that I'm absolutely convinced no police officer comes to work in the morning and says, do you know what, I'm going to make life really hard for anybody who's right wing. It doesn't happen. However, there is an institutional leaning. I won't use the word bias. I think that would probably be too strong. But there is an institutional leaning, certainly towards the status quo, certainly towards the thinking that the state is best because they all work for the government. So it's natural for them to think that government action is a good idea and community action perhaps is a bit haphazard and can't be relied on. But over the past 30 odd years, the police have not stood up very well, in my opinion, to the hammering that they've been taken from a lot of left-wing activists. So if you look at the Macpherson report that came out of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, which portrayed, and it was only talking about the Metropolitan Police, but it spread throughout policing, portrayed the police as being racist, as incompetent, as not taking the interests of minority communities very seriously. I thought at the time that was unfair. I think it is very unfair. But the police haven't stood up to it. The police just sort of rolled over and said, oh yes, isn't it terrible? We'd better change. And have introduced a lot of changes that you and I would consider to be very left-wing, and that you and I would consider to be very much what today would be termed woke. And that pervades policing very much. So I don't think any police officers are deliberately biased, but the general atmosphere is definitely to the left of centre. And I think that's down to the fact that the police leadership failed to stand up to their critics. So if you take Stephen Lawrence, for instance, where the investigation into his murder quite clearly was deeply flawed, and it's been portrayed that that's normal. Well, it's not normal. If you look at London that year, I think there were 6 or 7 murders where the victim was black and the killer was white. In all of them, except for Stephen Lawrence, the Metropolitan Police identified the murderer, charged the murderer, and got the murderer convicted. So the Stephen Lawrence killing, terrible as it was unusual. It wasn't normal. And yet it's being used as if this is what goes on all the time and the police have got to take responsibility. And I put the blame on the police leadership. They didn't stand up to their critics. They didn't answer back. Instead, they just rolled over and went with a left-wing response to it. And I think that, over the past 30 years, has had detrimental impact on how policing is done in this country.
Well, we do see cases where individual officers seem to be stepping further than the law requires. I mean, take, because it's so high profile, take the Alison Pearson. Well, Whether she was arrested or not seems to be up in the air, and whether it was a non-crime hate incident or an actual crime that they were investigating. Again, they seem to have been a little bit sort of strange. But the fact that she was doorstepped by multiple officers on Remembrance Sunday really didn't seem entirely appropriate. And in fact, the whole process didn't. And so could you comment on that? Yeah. And in fact, response of the Police and Crime Commissioner for Essex?
Well, I mean, obviously, I haven't seen any of the detail on the Alison Pearson case. I'm just going on what I read in the newspapers. I thought it was an absolute disgrace. I thought it was very heavy-handed. I thought, well, it was just out of order. So the point I was trying to make earlier is that because the police are largely operating within a sort of soft left echo chamber, you don't get promoted in the police if you don't sign up to all this sort of stuff. And so when something is put in front of you, such as the Alison Pearson case, the background, the mood music that you're operating to is all about right-wing people are a little bit dangerous, right-wing people aren't fully respectable, right-wing people aren't quite right. And therefore, even if you're not acting in a biased way, even if you're not acting in a prejudiced way, you're sort of halfway to going there in the first place. As for the response from Roger Hurst, again, I haven't seen the internal details. What I would have done in that case is I would have asked the Chief Constable to come and see me. I would have expressed my disquiet. And obviously, I don't know quite what happened there, but, I'd have thought where you'd be ending up here is I would hesitate to stand up in public and say the Chief Constable is an idiot, because I've got to work with the guy. But there's nothing wrong with standing up and saying that in this one particular case, the proper process wasn't followed, or perhaps decisions were taken that could have been taken differently. And, I've instituted, certainly I would have looked for an internal inquiry into what went on and to try and make sure it doesn't happen again. So I can understand somebody in Roger's position might hesitate to stand up and just call police officers idiots. But at the same time, what happened was clearly unacceptable. And you need to find out what went wrong, why it went wrong, and then make sure it doesn't go wrong again. So, yeah, I don't want to criticise Roger directly because I don't know quite what happened. But certainly his reaction came across as being a bit weak. I think it could have been a lot more robust.
I think looking at it, and I accept what you say entirely, but the perception that was created of his response was very much in line with the perception of multiple elected Conservative officials who at every opportunity seem to have responded to whatever the incident may be in a way that is not aligned with Conservative values or Conservative...
I couldn't agree more. I can't tell you how fed up I was getting with the Conservative Party. So my theory on this, which may or may not be wrong, is 30 or 40 years ago, when the establishment and the civil service and the BBC and all the rest of them were broadly slightly right of centre and could be relied upon to be so, the Conservative Party saw its role as being sort of to protect the establishment, to make sure the establishment ran smoothly, to make sure it was effective and efficient and all of that. And I think that mentality still holds the Conservative Party in quite a firm grip. And they've completely missed the fact that now, largely, the BBC, the judiciary, the police, and the civil service are now broadly to the left of centre. And so if you're defending the status quo, you're actually defending left of centre. And I think that development has passed the Conservative Party by in large measure. And thoroughly decent people who are in the Conservative Party and think, oh no, my job is to make sure that the state runs efficiently, have missed that actually our job now, right of centre politicians, our job now is to try and stop the state becoming a left-wing organisation, which it is on its way to becoming. And that's why it's so important we get Nigel into number 10. It's so important we get a reform government, because we can start to dismantle that left-wing drift of the British state which is resulting in things. I mean, we're talking about policing, but it's that has resulted in the completely uncontrolled immigration to this country that's going on, because the state has drifted so far to the left they can't see anything wrong with it, and they don't understand the job of the British government is to protect the interests of the British people. They seem to think, well, no, we'll let anyone who likes come here and we'll pay them benefits and they can use the NHS and the British taxpayer will pay for it. Absolutely ridiculous. But the Conservative Party has sort of gone along with that drift and has ended up being far to the left of where a right-wing political party should be. And that's why people like me are leaving it and joining Reform.
And in that process, I mean, you do occasionally still get Conservative politicians saying things that seem passingly sensible, but because the party is so split between people who might still have sensible views and those who don't, I'm making the assumption that one of the reasons you left the Conservative Party is there didn't seem to be the prospect in your eyes, I'm putting words into your mouth, of the Conservative Party being able to recover the situation. I mean, where do you see the Conservative Party having come out of it relatively recently from that point?
Okay, so no, I think you're right. The Conservative Party is very much, even in traditional Conservative Party terms, the Conservative Party today is very much at the One Nation end of the Conservative Party spectrum as it was maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And that's because, in my view, two things. First of all, a sizable minority of members of Parliament in the Conservative Party are really quite left-wing. And a lot of them came from the SDP and from the Liberal Party and joined the Conservative Party, I suppose, for personally ambitious reasons. They thought Liberals are never going to get elected to government. I want to be in government, so I'll join the Conservatives. And somebody like I feel really sorry for Kemi, because even if she really wanted to introduce good, solid right-wing policies, there's probably about a quarter of her members of Parliament who would absolutely refuse to vote for it. And therefore, she wouldn't be able to get it through the House of Commons, and therefore she'd look an idiot and a Conservative Party would fall, which is why I think Reform are justifiably careful about who they put up as candidates, because you don't want to end up in the position where the Conservative Party was, that they let in a whole load of people who were probably very competent and very intelligent, but were basically left-wing. And therefore, a Conservative government would be hamstrung over trying to get anything in. So where do I think the Conservative Party is? I think it's on its way to becoming another version of the Liberals, in that it'll be a minority party. It'll bounce around somewhere 20, 30 members of Parliament, run a few councils here and there. But basically, it's going to be I could say it'd be a traditional leftish party in the way that the Liberal Democrats are a very woke left-wing party that are really into the identity politics side of things. Don't think the Conservative Party will go there, but they're very soft left, and I think they'll end up as a minority party, bouncing around 20 or 30 MPs, run a few councils here and there. That'll be your lot.
Returning to policing, you've said about the impact of the leftward drift of police higher command. You also mentioned just now about the changing demographic of the country with the size of migration. Leading, so if you look at your newspapers, to breakdown of law and order, either because it's not enforced as much as it was, or because there are people carrying out crimes in a volume that didn't apply in the past. So to what extent do you think that the present travails of particularly petty crime, thefts of iPhones, street robberies, etc., incidents of rape, how much of that is down to failures on the police side, and how much of that would you say is down to changing demographics?
Well, some of it is definitely down to changing demographics. I mean, there have been figures released about the national identity and the national citizenship of criminals in different classes, and you can quite clearly see that Albanians and Somalis are far more likely to be involved in serious crime than a native-born Brit, or indeed somebody that's come here from France or Italy. So there are some cold hard statistics that absolutely demonstrate that some crime types are associated with some nationalities. I think that's beyond doubt. The police themselves, I think, obviously the only person guilty and responsible for a crime is the person who commits it. I think that's the first thing to say in presage to this. But the police, like I say, they've changed their model of policing. It used to be primarily about maintaining law and order on the streets, suppressing minor crime, and on the theory, I think it's called the broken windows theory, isn't it? That if you stop minor crime, that by itself will stop a progression and an escalation to more major crime. British policing abandoned that some decades ago, and instead is relying on a reactive method, that you react to a crime after it's happened rather than try and stop it happening in the first place. And because, of course, resources are tight, that means they concentrate on the more serious crimes, which means minor crimes don't get the attention that they should. So, yeah, some responsibility falls on the police. But I'll also just chip in, if I may, with another thing, because we were talking about immigration. Leicester is ethnically and religiously a massively diverse city. I think something over 25% of the population is Muslim, 20% of the population is Hindu. We've got Buddhists, we've got West Indians, we've got people who have emigrated here directly from Africa. It's very, very mixed. And again, the national police hierarchy is putting a lot of pressure on to conform to academic studies about, ethnicity and so on. My experience of going into the city and working with the people who live there and so on, I don't change what I do. I don't change how I do it, but I show respect. Okay. So, when I go into a mosque, I take my shoes off because that is the respectful thing to do. When I go into a Sikh Gurdwara, I put a few coins into the collection box because that's a respectable thing to do there. And I think it is wrong for the police to change how they police communities, because what they're ending up doing is that they're treating people differently depending on the colour of their skin. That, to my mind, is absolutely wrong. Yes, show respect for people's culture. That if they're here legally, then they're here legally, and we should be respectful to their culture. But we shouldn't change the law to suit them. They've come to live here, and so they've got to abide by our laws, and we've got to enforce our laws on them just as we do on native-born Brits. I think to go down the route that the national police organisations are going, of policing different communities in different ways, is the wrong one. The way to deal with large-scale immigration is, first of all, to make sure that we're getting the people here we wanted, whether that's in terms of how useful they are to the economy or what. That's another debate. But people who come here need to understand they need to integrate into the British society. They need to obey British laws, and they need to respect our culture. It's not just up to us to respect their culture. They have to respect our culture as well. And I think that's been lost in the general governmental approach to immigration. Certainly it's been lost in the way that the police hierarchy down in London expect the police to deal with different minorities and different cultures. It's the wrong route.
Can I ask you, Rupert, it's fairly clear, I think, that from what you've said, that in the next couple of years that you will find yourself without a role as Police and Crime Commissioner in Leicestershire and Rutland. Yeah. How do you see your future in terms of, would you go back to history again, or would you look to continue somewhere else in reform?
Well, history has been a good friend to me, it must be said. I've been working in it for about 40 years. I must say, actually, I've developed a sideline in the paranormal as well, but I got into that through ghosts, because all ghost stories are history stories. And so I started doing some work in ghosts. And then once I started doing that, someone wanted me to write about the Yeti. And then somebody else wanted me to do the Loch Ness Monster and what have you. So I also do that side of things. But yeah, history's been a good friend to me. And it must be said, it's a lot less stressful than this. If I published a magazine article that said the Battle of Hastings took place in 1924, it would be deeply embarrassing, but nobody gets hurt. Whereas this job, potentially decisions I make can really, really have an impact on people's lives. So this is much more stressful. I'm also working a lot longer hours on this than I've used to in history. So I think going back to history would be very tempting. But it's 2 years away yet. Who knows? And I enjoy politics, so maybe I'll stand for local council or something. I don't know.
Can I ask you a simpler question then? Would you consider standing either for council or for parliament?
I'd certainly consider standing for council. When I was on council down in London, I really enjoyed it, partly because it meant I could still do history. Being a councillor is a part-time role, unless you get to be leader of the council, of course. So being councillor is a part-time role. It would still enable me to do history, whereas at the moment I can't, because I just don't have the time. I'd certainly consider council. A member of parliament, don't know. The general election is not for another 3 years. I might be in a completely different place with my personal life by then. Who knows? Don't know. Haven't thought about it.
So, just picking up on your historian hat, in terms of where we are now, both with the political parties and the divisions within society, do you see any historical parallels to where we are now that might inform your view of things, or not?
Yeah, I think we're in a very dangerous place, personally. What tends to be called the social contract, which is that people go along with what the government does because they believe A, the government has got their best interests at heart, B, the government is fairly competent, and C, if they don't like the government, they can chuck it out at the next election. So I think that arrangement is in danger of breaking down. I think the British state and many of the people active in it have behaved recklessly over the past 20 years. I'm not so pessimistic. I think we're going to end up with a civil war. Certainly, we could end up with a lot of disorder. We could certainly end up with a lot of civil resistance. So just in a small part. 3 years ago now. Probably about 2.5 years ago. I'd been doing this job for about a year, and I realised, I'm just never at home to watch television, and my television broke down. Okay, so I thought, I can't be bothered to buy a new one. It costs a lot of money to get a decent one. I hardly ever watch it. So I then also stopped paying the BBC license. I still get letters from the BBC threatening me with legal action if I don't cough up. And I haven't got a TV. I haven't had a TV for about 3 years. And a lot of people are not paying their BBC license. And obviously, that's illegal and I can't condone it. But that's being driven by the fact they don't think the BBC is fit for purpose. They don't see why they should pay for it. And I can see this country drifting more and more into a civil disobedience sort of area. And once that starts to break down, then respect for private property breaks down and so on. So we can put it right. That's another reason why I'm campaigning so hard for reforms. I think we can still put this right. I don't think the Conservative Party recognises the scale of the problem. And if it does, it's certainly not putting forward any ideas of what to do about it, whereas Reform is the only party that is. If you want me to choose a historic analogy, I'd probably put us in France, maybe the late 1770s, 1778, 1779, somewhere like that. Because at that point, the French government was in serious financial difficulties like our government is. The French government had a very heavy debt burden, as our government does, and the population were getting very unhappy about the way the government was being run. They were very unhappy about a lot of onerous restrictions that were put on people in much the same way, we've just been talking about Alison Pearson and other people who are arrested for things they've put on social media. We'll see. in the 18th century, France didn't have social media, but there were similar complaints about unfairness in the way the government was behaving, and unfairness in the way the social society was organised. So if you want me to pick a historic analogy, I'll go for France in the late 1770s. And at that point, they were 8 or 10 years away from the revolution. We're not France. We're not prone to revolutions. But there are a lot of similarities in how reckless the government has been, the problems the government has got, and the discontent amongst the population.
Yes, and certainly the aristos and their privileges need to be addressed so that the rank and file see more fairness in society.
Well, indeed, and the fact they were leading such completely different lives, and this is where you get the wokeism coming from, is that people who live in I don't know, Islington or Highgate or somewhere like that only go to nice dinner parties with nice people who work for the BBC and hold similar views, are leading a completely different life to somebody who lives on a council estate in Leicester and is finding work hard to come by because of the big influx of low-skilled or unskilled labour in the form of immigration that's flooded into this country and into Leicester, is shifting the demographics, shifting the economy. And if you've got a fairly low income to start with, that has a massive impact on you in the way that somebody who's on £100,000 a year job at the BBC in Islington is just never going to come across and doesn't even recognise is a problem.
I think just because I want to catch it on the podcast, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the term two-tier policing.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested in to what extent you think that we are in a two-tier policing, two-tier justice environment.
I think we're getting there. I think at the moment what you're dealing with is a matter of unconscious bias, if I put it like that. So I don't think the police system is deliberately or even consciously operating two different systems. But I'll give you an example, okay? Not from Leicestershire, I'm afraid, but I was talking to another PCC who was getting rather irate with his force because they had taken a decision around a Muslim protest. This was when there were all the protests against Palestine and Israel and so on. And one of the factors that had been taken into account was the concern that if the event was banned, the organisers might go ahead anyway. Then the police would be in a position of having to move in to break it up, because it would then be an illegal gathering. And that the people likely to attend that sort of event were the sort of people who were likely to turn violent. Right? And my colleague was really concerned about that. So they said, well, what you're saying is if somebody has got a lot of very violent followers, you're going to let them go ahead and have their event. Whereas if you've got a bunch of elderly women from the Women's Institute wanting to do something, you're going to happily ban that because they're not going to start any fights. That's the wrong approach to take. So if you like, both gatherings would have been subject to the same system. They would have been subject to the same process, but you'd get a very different outcome because on the one hand you had a bunch of violent thugs and on the other hand a bunch of nice old ladies wanting to do a bit of knitting. And so a process can end up being two-tier and giving different results, even if the process is the same. And I think that's not generally recognised within the world of policing as much as it should be.
I mean, that was resonant of the decision by West Midlands Police over the Tel Aviv team match to ban their fans from coming there.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Despite the Prime Minister's saying that it was the wrong decision, they proceeded to to ban the fans, the Jewish fans, and it really just leaves the wrong taste in people's mouths.
Correct. Yes, it does. And, if you're looking at it from the outside, you're going to think, well, that's not right. How can this be allowed and that's banned, and this person be arrested and that person not even brought in for questioning and so on? One of the other things that I do complain about here a lot as well is the way the police, they're not very good at how things look from the outsider's point of view. They'll reach a decision to go and arrest somebody or not arrest them or whatever, based on what they believe to be objective facts. How likely are we to get a conviction out of this, and so on. And I'm sure they're right, but what they're not very good at is thinking, well, how does this look to an ordinary member of the public? And generally, the police aren't very good at thinking that one through. And this is where, again, you end up with the impression of two-tier policing, because they just don't look at it from the point of view of the public. To certainly the more senior police officers, that's not very important. What's important is, are we doing the right things in terms of policing process? Are they doing the right things in terms of guidance from the College of Policing? So that's very important to them. But how a decision might look to a member of the public, it's not really very important. And this is why they've stumbled into this business about two-tier policing. And in some ways, they don't know what to do about it because it's outside their comfort zone. So they're a bit stuck.
Is there anything, as I think we're running to the witching hour because we don't want to outstay our welcome, is there anything that we should have asked you?
I've got another meeting to get to, but carry on.
Is there anything that we should have asked you that we've left you off on that you would have put to yourself?
Ooh. Now, there is a very good question. Well, I know it's not strictly within my remit, but we haven't talked about prison. We haven't talked about probation. We haven't talked about David Lammy's recent announcement he wants to get rid of jury trial, which is absolutely appalling decision in my book. I mean, jury trial is so important. In and of itself, but particularly within a common law system, which is what we've got, is one of the few safeguards against activist judges. And we have seen some awful decisions by judges who think they know better than Parliament and so on. What else haven't we talked about? We haven't talked about the budget. We haven't talked about how dreadful the Labour government is. In terms of strict policey stuff, no, I think we've covered everything. But I'd have gone for jury trial and how awful the Labour government proposals are on that.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But the only thing I would say about it is that there have been a few jury trials recently where the verdicts have been very strange.
I would much rather have juries where a handful of them make odd decisions that to people who don't understand, rather than have a judiciary who feel that they're free to do whatever they like and impose their views on the law. I think that would be much more dangerous than a few bizarre results.
I'm certainly with you on that. We haven't really got time to dive down those rabbit holes, but would you be happy to return and discuss the wider judicial and law-related issues?
Yeah, I would be absolutely delighted. The criminal justice system in this country has got real problems. I mean, part of it is coming from a left-wing bent. Part of it is coming from the feeling amongst a lot of people involved in the criminal justice system that crime is a result of poor social conditions rather than it being a result of people being evil. The prison system is a disgrace. And so on. I'll be delighted to come back, but it's a huge subject to go down.
Well, I was just going to say thanks very much indeed for being on the podcast, Rupert. We really appreciate it. And thank you for...
No worries. Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
All right, speak to you next time then. Bye.
Cheerio. Bye. Bye.